They laughed when 22-year-old Alia Nelson from Stockholm applied for submarine duty in the Royal Navy. Too emotional, they said. Submarines aren't places for tears. But what they didn't know was that this young woman would spend the next 2 years living underwater, becoming the backbone of an entire fleet operation that would save hundreds of lives. While her colleagues enjoyed shore leave and normal rotations, Alia volunteered for every extended mission, every dangerous deep-water assignment, every operation others refused to take. By the time her superiors realized what she had become, she wasn't just another crew member. She was the submarine specialist they couldn't operate without. This is the story of how being too emotional became the exact quality that made her irreplaceable. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The recruitment office in Portsmouth buzzed with the typical morning energy of young men and women trying to change their lives. Alia Nelson sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, her application clutched in slightly trembling hands, watching as officer after officer processed the hopeful candidates around her. At 22, she stood barely 5'4", with the kind of delicate features that made people assume she belonged in an office, not in the depths of the ocean. The sunny March morning outside contrasted sharply with the sterile fluorescent lighting of the Naval Recruitment Center. Through the windows, she could see families walking along the harbor, children pointing excitedly at the massive warships docked in the distance. Those same ships represented everything Alia had dreamed about since she was 12 years old, reading about underwater exploration in her cramped Stockholm apartment. Her accent still carried traces of her Swedish heritage, though she'd lived in England for 6 years. Her father, a merchant marine, had moved the family to Portsmouth when Alia was 16, hoping for better opportunities. What he hadn't expected was his daughter's fascination with the submarine service, a fascination that had grown into an obsession over her university years studying marine engineering. Nelson Alia. The recruitment officer's voice cut through her thoughts. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, according to his nameplate, looked like he'd stepped straight from a recruitment poster. Square jaw, perfect uniform, the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. "Yes, sir," Alia replied, standing quickly and smoothing her skirt. She'd deliberated for hours about what to wear, finally settling on professional attire that she hoped would be taken seriously. Hayes glanced at her application, his eyebrows rising slightly. "Submarine service? You're sure about this?" "Absolutely, sir. I've completed my degree in marine engineering with a focus on underwater systems. My thesis was on deep-sea pressure management and—" "Right," Hayes interrupted, clearly not interested in her academic achievements. "Have you considered surface vessels? We have excellent opportunities in communications, logistics, even engineering positions that might be more suitable." The word suitable hung in the air like a challenge. Alia had heard variations of this conversation in her head dozens of times, had prepared for the skepticism, but experiencing it firsthand still stung. "Sir, I specifically want submarine duty. I've researched the requirements extensively, and I believe I'm qualified for—" "Miss Nelson," Hayes said, setting down her application and leaning back in his chair, "submarine duty is demanding in ways you might not understand. We're talking about months underwater, confined spaces, high-pressure situations that require a certain temperament." Behind her, Alia heard muffled laughter from other candidates waiting their turn. She recognized the sound, the same dismissive amusement she'd encountered throughout her engineering studies, every time she expressed interest in the more challenging, traditionally male-dominated fields. "I understand the challenges, sir," Alia said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "I've spent summers working on North Sea oil platforms, lived in confined quarters, worked under pressure. I'm not afraid of difficult conditions." Hayes made a note on her application, but his expression remained skeptical. The thing about submarines, Miss Nelson, is that there's no room for emotional reactions. When you're 300 feet underwater and something goes wrong, we need crew members who can think clearly, act decisively, without getting overwhelmed. The implication was clear. Women were too emotional, too unstable, too likely to crack under pressure. Alia had heard this argument before, had seen it used to exclude women from countless opportunities in her field. "Sir, my academic record shows consistent performance under pressure. My professors can attest to my ability to remain calm in crisis situations. I've never let emotion interfere with my professional judgment." Hayes glanced at his watch, clearly eager to move on to the next candidate. "We'll review your application, Miss Nelson. The submarine service receives hundreds of applications for very few positions. The selection process is extremely competitive." As Alia left the recruitment office, she heard Hayes speaking to his colleague. "Stockholm girl wants submarine duty. Can you imagine? First rough patrol and she'd be crying into her pillow." The laughter that followed made her stomach clench with familiar anger. Walking along Portsmouth's waterfront, Alia stared at the submarines moored in the distance. Their sleek, dark shapes looked like sleeping leviathans, mysterious and powerful. She'd studied their specifications until she could recite them from memory, had read every manual she could access, understood their systems better than most of the men who'd been processing applications ahead of her. That evening, in her small flat overlooking the harbor, Alia spread her submarine manuals across her kitchen table. If they wanted to judge her based on stereotypes rather than qualifications, she'd prove them wrong. She just had to figure out how. 3 weeks later, Alia received her acceptance letter. Not for submarine duty, but for general naval service with a placement in fleet communications. The letter was polite, professional, and thoroughly devastating. "While your qualifications are impressive," it read, "submarine positions are currently filled. However, we believe your skills would be valuable in supporting fleet operations from our communication center." The communication center. Shore duty. Exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. Her supervisor, Chief Petty Officer Morrison, was a weathered man in his 50s who'd spent most of his career on destroyers before being relegated to shore duty due to a back injury. He greeted Alia's obvious disappointment with practiced indifference. "Look, Nelson, I know this isn't what you wanted, but communications is vital work. You'll be coordinating between surface vessels and submarine operations, tracking movements, managing logistics. It's important stuff." Alia nodded politely, but inside she felt hollow. She'd moved to England, completed her degree, spent years preparing for underwater service, only to end up in a windowless room filled with radio equipment and computer screens. The naval base at Portsmouth was a sprawling complex of offices, barracks, and training facilities. Alia's workstation was in Building C, a concrete structure that hummed with electronic equipment and smelled perpetually of coffee and industrial cleaning supplies. Her colleagues were a mix of career communication specialists and others who, like her, hadn't quite ended up where they'd planned. "Don't take it personally," said Petty Officer Sarah Chen, a friendly woman from Manchester who'd been working communications for 8 years. "The submarine service is like an exclusive club. They don't let just anyone in, especially—" She trailed off, but Alia understood the implication. "Especially women, especially emotional foreigners who didn't fit the traditional mold." Alia's daily routine involved monitoring radio traffic between the base and active submarine patrols, coordinating supply schedules, and managing the complex logistics that kept underwater operations running smoothly. It was detailed work that required focus and precision, but it felt like watching life happen rather than living it. The break room conversations were the worst part. During lunch, she'd listened to the male communications officers discuss submarine operations with the casual authority of people who'd never actually served aboard one. They'd debate tactics, critique command decisions, and speculate about crew performances with the confidence of armchair experts. "The Vigilant's been underwater for 6 weeks now," said communication specialist Davies, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Bet the crew's going stir-crazy. It takes a special kind of person to handle that isolation." "Not everyone's cut out for it," agreed his colleague Thompson. "You need people who can keep their heads when things go wrong. Can't have anyone breaking down when lives are on the line." Alia bit her tongue, focusing on her sandwich. She'd been tracking the Vigilance patrol for weeks, knew their route, their mission parameters, their crew composition. She understood their operations better than most of the people discussing them. But her opinions weren't welcome in these conversations. The condescension extended beyond casual conversations. When Alia submitted detailed analyses of submarine communication patterns, suggesting improvements to coordination protocols, her supervisors praised her thoroughness while dismissing her recommendations as interesting but impractical. When she identified potential safety issues in patrol schedules, she was told that submarine operations were complex and required experience she didn't have. The message was clear. She could support submarine operations, but she couldn't understand them. She could coordinate their logistics, but she couldn't contribute to their strategy. She was valuable as an administrator, not as a participant. 6 months into her communications assignment, Alia began staying late to study submarine technical manuals and operational reports. The base library had extensive archives of patrol records, maintenance schedules, and tactical analyses. While her colleagues went home to their families or out to pubs, Alia immersed herself in the details of underwater warfare. She memorized the specifications of every submarine in the Royal Navy fleet, studied their capabilities and limitations, analyzed their patrol patterns and mission success rates. She learned about underwater navigation, sonar operations, torpedo systems, life support management, and emergency procedures. Her small flat filled with charts, technical drawings, and operational manuals that she'd borrowed or photocopied. "You know you don't actually work on submarines, right?" said Sarah Chen one evening, finding Alia still at her desk, surrounded by submarine schematics. Alia looked up from a manual on underwater emergency procedures. "I know, but understanding their operations makes me better at supporting them." Sarah shook her head with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Alia, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. The submarine service isn't going to suddenly change their minds about you because you've memorized their technical manuals." "Maybe not," Alia thought as Sarah left for the day. But she'd rather be disappointed trying than disappointed doing nothing. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative. While her colleagues assumed Alia was simply dedicated to her communications role, she was actually preparing for something far more ambitious. Every night after her official duties ended, she transformed her small Portsmouth flat into an unofficial submarine training center. The living room walls were covered with detailed schematics of the Astute-class submarines, annotated with her own notes about system redundancies and failure points. Her coffee table held stacks of classified maintenance reports that she'd gained access to through her communications clearance, reports that revealed patterns of equipment failures and crew performance issues that nobody else seemed to be tracking systematically. Alia had discovered that her position in fleet communications gave her unique access to information that even submarine crews didn't see. She monitored distress calls, equipment malfunctions, supply requests, and crew rotation schedules across the entire submarine fleet. While everyone else saw individual incidents, Alia began recognizing systemic patterns. She documented everything in detailed spreadsheets. Which submarines experienced the most mechanical failures? Which crews requested early returns to port? Which captains had the highest success rates in difficult missions? Her analysis revealed that submarine operations were far less predictable and far more dangerous than the official reports suggested. More importantly, she identified the gaps. Situations where current protocols failed, where crew training was insufficient, where equipment limitations created vulnerabilities that weren't being addressed. Alia realized that the submarine service's greatest weakness wasn't technical, it was their inability to see their own blind spots. Her weekend routine involved diving simulations at a local commercial facility. The instructor, a former Royal Navy diver named Captain Williams, initially questioned why a communications officer needed advanced underwater training. "I want to understand what our submarine crews experience," Alia explained during her first session. "How can I effectively coordinate their operations if I don't understand the physical and psychological challenges they face?" Williams was impressed by her dedication and natural aptitude. Alia demonstrated exceptional calm under pressure, precise technical knowledge, and an intuitive understanding of underwater environments that surprised everyone, including herself. She could equalize pressure changes faster than most experienced divers, navigate in zero visibility conditions, and maintain steady breathing even during emergency scenarios. "You've got natural submarine instincts," Williams told her after a particularly challenging deep water simulation. "Ever consider applying for actual submarine duty?" Alia's bitter laugh revealed more than she intended. "They don't think I'm suitable for submarine work." What Williams didn't know was that Alia had been secretly developing skills far beyond basic diving. She'd learned emergency medical procedures specific to submarine environments, studied underwater welding techniques, and even taught herself basic nuclear reactor safety protocols by studying publicly available technical documents. Her linguistic abilities, inherited from her multilingual Swedish family, proved unexpectedly valuable. Alia could understand Russian technical communications, interpret German naval signals, and recognize French submarine signals, skills that could be crucial in intelligence-gathering operations. She'd spent hours listening to foreign naval communications, developing an ear for international submarine activities that few British personnel possessed. The most challenging part of her preparation was physical conditioning. Submarine duty required not just mental toughness, but physical resilience under extreme conditions. Alia developed a rigorous fitness routine focused on the specific demands of underwater service. Exercises that improved her ability to work in confined spaces, strengthened her cardiovascular system for low oxygen environments, and enhanced her manual dexterity for precise technical work. She practiced meditation techniques to maintain psychological stability during isolation, studied sleep deprivation management, and learned stress reduction methods specifically designed for submarine crews. Alia understood that submarine service wasn't just about technical knowledge, it was about maintaining human performance under conditions that pushed people to their psychological limits. Her colleagues in communications began noticing her unusual expertise. When submarine crews reported technical problems, Alia could often suggest solutions before the official engineering teams had analyzed the issues. When patrol schedules needed adjustment due to mechanical problems, she could predict which submarines would be available based on maintenance patterns that others hadn't recognized. "How do you know so much about submarine operations?" Chief Morrison asked. After Alia correctly predicted that the HMS Audacious would need to return to port 3 days early due to a recurring sonar malfunction. "I pay attention to the patterns in our communications traffic," Alia replied diplomatically. "When you monitor the same types of reports repeatedly, you start recognizing trends." Morrison nodded, accepting her explanation, but Alia could see the curiosity in his eyes. Her knowledge was becoming difficult to explain as simply being thorough in her communications duties. The truth was that Alia had become more knowledgeable about submarine operations than most of the people actually serving on submarines. She understood the technical systems, the operational challenges, the crew dynamics, and the strategic implications of underwater warfare better than officers who'd spent years in the service. But all of her preparation remained invisible to the people who made assignment decisions. To them, she was still just the emotional Swedish girl who worked in communications and occasionally offered helpful suggestions about logistics. Alia knew that knowledge without opportunity was worthless. She needed a chance to prove that her unconventional preparation had made her more qualified for submarine duty than the traditional candidates who'd been automatically accepted. She just didn't know when, or if, that chance would come. The barriers facing Alia weren't just individual prejudices. They were built into the entire structure of naval operations. After 18 months in communications, she'd learned that the submarine service operated like an exclusive fraternity, with informal networks and unwritten rules that effectively excluded outsiders. The first barrier was the rotation system. Submarine assignments were typically given to officers who'd already served on surface vessels, completed specific training programs, or had personal recommendations from current submarine commanders. Alia, stuck in shore communications, couldn't access any of these pathways. She was trapped in a cycle where she couldn't get submarine experience because she lacked submarine experience. Her requests for transfer were met with polite deflection. "Perhaps next year" became the standard response. "When positions become available. If circumstances change." The message was clear. They weren't saying no, but they weren't saying yes either. They were simply waiting for her to give up and accept her current role. The second barrier was the old boys network. Submarine commanders selected their own crews, and they naturally chose people they knew, trusted, or who came recommended by colleagues they respected. Alia had no connections within this network. Her supervisors in communications, while appreciative of her work, had no influence over submarine assignments and no relationships with underwater commanders. She watched as male colleagues with less technical knowledge and shorter service records received opportunities for advanced training, temporary submarine assignments, and specialized schools. When she asked about these opportunities, she was told they were competitive selections based on operational needs and career development paths that somehow never seemed to include her. The third barrier was perception management. Every time Alia demonstrated extensive knowledge about submarine operations, she was viewed with suspicion rather than admiration. Her detailed technical questions were seen as inappropriate curiosity. Her suggestions for operational improvements were dismissed as theoretical insights from someone who didn't understand the practical realities. During briefings, when Alia offered analysis based on her comprehensive study of patrol patterns and equipment failures, she was politely thanked and ignored. The same insights, when presented by male colleagues who'd learned them from her informal conversations, were taken seriously and sometimes implemented. "Nelson's certainly enthusiastic," she overheard Lieutenant Davies telling Chief Morrison, "but she seems to think she knows more about submarine operations than people who've actually served on them. It's a bit presumptuous." The word presumptuous stung because Alia realized it was code for something else entirely. A man with her level of knowledge would be seen as prepared, dedicated, or ambitious. A woman with the same knowledge was presumptuous, overreaching, or trying too hard. The fourth barrier was the mythology surrounding submarine service. The culture portrayed submarine duty as requiring special masculine qualities: stoicism, physical toughness, emotional detachment, brotherhood under pressure. These weren't just job requirements, they were identity markers that defined who belonged and who didn't. Alia encountered this mythology in conversations, training materials, and official communications. Submarine service was described in language that emphasized its exclusive nature, its demands for particular types of people, its requirements for characteristics that were subtly coded as masculine. The message was that submarines weren't jobs, they were tests of worthiness that most people, especially women, would fail. The most frustrating barrier was the circular logic used to justify her exclusion. When Alia pointed out her technical qualifications, she was told that submarine service required practical experience. When she sought practical experience, she was told she needed technical qualifications that could only be gained through submarine service. When she demonstrated both technical knowledge and practical preparation, she was told she lacked the temperament for underwater duty, a quality that apparently could only be assessed by giving someone submarine duty. Her annual performance reviews praised her competence while reinforcing her limitations. Specialist Nelson demonstrates exceptional technical knowledge and attention to detail. Her analytical skills and dedication to understanding fleet operations are commendable. However, her interests appear to extend beyond her assigned role, which may indicate a lack of focus on her current responsibilities. Lack of focus. Her comprehensive preparation for submarine duty was being characterized as a professional weakness. The personal toll was significant. Alia found herself questioning her own judgment, wondering if her supervisors were right about her limitations. Maybe she was being presumptuous. Maybe her knowledge was theoretical rather than practical. Maybe she really wasn't suited for submarine duty and was simply too stubborn to accept reality. Her family back in Stockholm couldn't understand her persistence. "Why don't you just accept the promotion to senior communications specialist?" her father asked during their weekly phone call. "It's good work, steady career progression, and you're obviously valued in that role." Alia struggled to explain that accepting the promotion felt like accepting defeat. She joined the Navy to serve on submarines, not to spend her career managing radio communications about submarine operations. Every day in her current role felt like a reminder of opportunities denied rather than achievements earned. But the barriers remained firmly in place, and Alia seemed no closer to breaking through them than she'd been 18 months earlier. The crisis began with a routine morning briefing that quickly became anything but routine. Alia was at her communication station, monitoring the standard fleet check-ins, when the first distress signal came through at 0847 hours on a gray Tuesday morning in November. "Mayday! Mayday! This is HMS Trafalgar. We have experienced catastrophic flooding in the engine compartment. Repeat, catastrophic flooding. We are emergency surfacing and require immediate assistance." The communications center erupted into controlled chaos. Chief Morrison immediately activated emergency protocols, while Alia began coordinating with rescue vessels. But as she tracked the Trafalgar's position, her extensive study of submarine operations told her something that the official response wasn't recognizing. This wasn't just one emergency. The Trafalgar had been operating as part of a coordinated 3-submarine patrol in the North Atlantic. Her sister ships, HMS Talent and HMS Tireless, were maintaining radio silence as part of their operational security protocols. Standard procedure was for submarines to check in every 12 hours unless emergency conditions required immediate communication. Alia realized that the same underwater geological activity that had likely caused the Trafalgar's flooding, an unexpected seismic shift that had damaged her hull, posed potential threats to the other submarines in the patrol group. But the official response was focused entirely on rescuing the Trafalgar's crew, not on warning the other submarines about potential dangers. Within 2 hours, Alia's worst fears were confirmed. HMS Talent reported sonar malfunctions and navigation system failures. The submarine was operating blind in increasingly dangerous waters, unable to surface due to severe weather conditions that had developed since the morning. Then came the third crisis. HMS Tireless had gone completely silent. Their last communication had been a routine position report 18 hours earlier. They were operating in the deepest section of their patrol area, where rescue operations would be nearly impossible if something went wrong. The situation facing Fleet Command was unprecedented. 3 submarines in distress simultaneously, scattered across hundreds of miles of dangerous North Atlantic waters, with weather conditions that severely limited surface rescue operations. Traditional rescue protocols were designed to handle single emergencies, not coordinated disasters affecting multiple submarines. Alia watched from her communication station as senior officers struggled to coordinate responses. The rescue ships dispatched to assist Trafalgar were being battered by 15-foot swells. The helicopters attempting to reach HMS Talent were grounded by fog and high winds, and nobody knew where HMS Tireless was or what condition they were in. The situation facing Fleet Command was unprecedented. 3 submarines in distress simultaneously, scattered across hundreds of miles of dangerous North Atlantic waters, with weather conditions that severely limited surface rescue operations. Traditional rescue protocols were designed to handle single emergencies, not coordinated disasters affecting multiple submarines. Alia watched from her communications station as senior officers struggled to coordinate responses. The rescue ships dispatched to assist Trafalgar were being battered by 15-foot swells. The helicopters attempting to reach HMS Talent were grounded by fog and high winds. And nobody knew where HMS Tireless was or what condition they were in. "We need someone who understands all 3 patrol areas," Captain Richardson announced during an emergency command meeting that Alia was monitoring through her communications equipment. Someone who knows the underwater terrain, the operational patterns, and the technical capabilities of each submarine. Alia realized she was probably the only person on the base who met those criteria. Her months of studying patrol patterns, memorizing underwater topography, and analyzing submarine capabilities had given her comprehensive knowledge of the entire operational area. She knew where each submarine should be, what routes they would likely take in emergency situations, and what technical limitations might affect their responses to crisis conditions. But she also knew that her knowledge wouldn't be taken seriously. She was communications personnel, not operational command. Her insights would be dismissed as theoretical speculation from someone who lacked practical submarine experience. The turning point came when Captain Richardson asked for analysis of HMS Tireless' probable position. The submarine specialists offered various theories based on standard operational procedures, but their estimates varied by dozens of miles, distances that could mean the difference between successful rescue and complete disaster. Alia knew exactly where Tireless was likely to be. Her analysis of their patrol patterns, combined with her understanding of how submarine commanders respond to emergency situations, pointed to a specific underwater canyon where they would have sought shelter from the seismic activity. But the area was extremely dangerous, accessible only by someone with intimate knowledge of the underwater terrain and exceptional technical skills. She also knew that traditional rescue approaches wouldn't work. The weather conditions, underwater geography, and technical challenges required unconventional solutions that could only be implemented by someone willing to take extraordinary risks. As the hours passed and rescue efforts continued to fail, Alia realized that 3 submarine crews, nearly 300 sailors, might die because the people in charge couldn't think beyond standard procedures. The same rigid thinking that had kept her out of submarine service was now preventing effective responses to save submarine crews. The opportunity she'd been preparing for had arrived, but it came at the cost of unprecedented danger to people she'd spent 2 years supporting from her communications station. Every sailor on those submarines was someone whose voice she'd heard over the radio, whose families she'd helped coordinate leave schedules for, whose safety she'd been tracking through routine operational reports. Alia realized that her months of preparation hadn't just been about proving herself worthy of submarine duty. They'd been about preparing to save lives when traditional approaches failed. The question was whether anyone would listen to her when the stakes were literally life and death. The emergency command center had transformed into a scene of barely controlled desperation. Senior officers clustered around tactical displays, while radio operators maintained constant communication with rescue vessels battling the worsening North Atlantic storm. Alia stood at the periphery, her communications clearance allowing her access, but her rank keeping her invisible to the decision-makers. Captain Richardson, now serving as incident commander, looked exhausted after 16 hours of coordinating rescue efforts. The Trafalgar's crew had been successfully evacuated, but HMS Talent remained trapped underwater with failing life support systems, and HMS Tireless had been silent for over 30 hours. "Sir," Alia said, stepping forward during a brief lull in the chaos, "I believe I know where HMS Tireless is located." Richardson glanced at her with the distracted irritation of someone dealing with too many interruptions. "Specialist Nelson, isn't it? Communications?" "Yes, sir. I've been tracking all 3 submarines' patrol patterns for the past 18 months. Based on their operational procedures and the timing of the seismic activity, Tireless would have sought shelter in the Hebrides Trench. It's approximately 40 nautical miles southwest of their last reported position." "The Hebrides Trench?" Lieutenant Commander Hayes, the same officer who'd dismissed her submarine application 2 years earlier, shook his head dismissively. "That's one of the deepest underwater canyons in the region. No submarine would voluntarily enter that area. It's far too dangerous." Alia's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "Sir, that's exactly why they would go there. Commander Walsh on the Tireless is known for unconventional tactical decisions. When the seismic activity began, he would have recognized that the trench walls would provide protection from underwater landslides, even though it meant operating at extreme depth." "Specialist Nelson," Richardson said with barely concealed impatience, "submarine tactical decisions are made by trained submarine officers with years of operational experience. Commander Walsh wouldn't risk his entire crew on such a dangerous maneuver." "Unless staying in open water posed an even greater risk," Alia pressed on. "The geological surveys from that area show unstable formations. The trench would be the only safe haven within their operational range." Hayes stepped forward, his expression shifting from dismissal to active skepticism. "How exactly does a communications specialist have access to geological surveys and detailed knowledge of submarine tactical procedures?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Alia realized that her extensive preparation, which she'd hoped would demonstrate her qualifications, was instead being viewed as inappropriate overreach. "I've studied the operational parameters for all fleet submarines," she replied carefully. "It helps me better coordinate communications and logistics support." "Studied from where?" Hayes demanded. "These tactical procedures are classified information, not casual reading material for communications personnel." Captain Richardson held up a hand to stop the interrogation, but his expression remained skeptical. "Even if your analysis were correct, Specialist Nelson, the Hebrides Trench is inaccessible to our rescue vessels. The depth exceeds the operational limits of our emergency submarines, and surface conditions make helicopter operations impossible." "Sir, I could," Alia began. "You could what?" Hayes interrupted. "You're a communications specialist. This is a submarine rescue operation requiring specialized equipment and personnel that we don't currently have available." Alia took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either open an opportunity or end her career. "Sir, I'm qualified for deep water rescue operations. I have advanced diving certifications, emergency medical training, and detailed knowledge of submarine life support systems. If Tireless is in the trench, I could reach them." The command center fell silent, except for the constant chatter of radio communications. Every officer present turned to stare at Alia with expressions ranging from astonishment to disbelief. Richardson spoke first, his voice dangerously quiet. "Specialist Nelson, are you suggesting that you, a communications officer with no submarine service experience, could accomplish a rescue that our trained submarine crews cannot?" "I'm suggesting that unconventional problems require unconventional solutions, sir. The rescue approaches we're using were designed for standard emergency scenarios. This situation requires someone willing to operate outside normal parameters." "This is ridiculous," declared. "Even if, and this is purely hypothetical, even if you possess the technical skills for such an operation, which I seriously doubt, the physical demands alone would be beyond your capabilities. We're talking about a deep water rescue in extreme conditions." Lieutenant Commander Morrison, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Sir, I have to agree with Hayes. Nelson is an excellent communications specialist, but submarine rescue operations require personnel with specific training and physical qualifications that she simply doesn't possess." Richardson nodded firmly. "Specialist Nelson, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this is not a situation for amateur heroism. We have professional rescue teams en route who are trained and equipped for these operations. Your job is to maintain communication support, not to propose rescue missions you're not qualified to undertake." "Sir, those rescue teams won't arrive for another 18 hours, Alia protested. "HMS Tireless has been silent for 31 hours. If they're trapped in the trench with damaged life support, they may not have 18 hours. "That's not your assessment to make," Richardson replied sharply. "Return to your station and continue monitoring communications. That's an order." As Alia walked back to her communications post, she heard Hayes speaking quietly to Richardson. "We need to document this incident. Nelson's clearly developed some sort of obsession with submarine operations that's affecting her judgment. She needs to be reassigned to duties more appropriate to her actual capabilities." Alia sat at her station, staring at the radio equipment that had been her window into submarine operations for 2 years. 300 sailors were potentially dying while rescue efforts failed, and she was being dismissed as an enthusiastic amateur whose knowledge was somehow inappropriate for her rank and role. But she also knew something that the officers didn't. She was right about HMS Tireless's location, and conventional rescue approaches were going to fail. The question was whether she was willing to prove it. The Hebrides Trench appeared on Alia's sonar display exactly where her calculations had predicted it would be. Even through the storm-tossed surface conditions, the depth readings showed the dramatic underwater canyon that dropped nearly 2,000 feet below sea level. More importantly, her advanced sonar equipment detected a metallic signature at the bottom of the trench that matched the dimensions of an Astute-class submarine. HMS Tireless was exactly where she'd said it would be. Alia anchored Boat 7 using the specialized deep-water mooring system she'd installed during her equipment modifications. The anchor was designed to hold position even in extreme weather, allowing her to maintain a fixed reference point during her dive operations. Her months of preparation were paying off in ways that her supervisors could never have imagined. The atmospheric diving suit that had consumed most of her salary proved its worth immediately. Unlike conventional diving equipment, the ADS maintained surface pressure even at extreme depths, allowing her to operate at the bottom of the trench without decompression requirements. The suit's mechanical manipulator arms were equipped with cutting tools, welding equipment, and emergency repair materials specifically chosen for submarine rescue operations. Her descent took 18 minutes, following a carefully planned route that avoided the unstable rock formations she'd identified during her geological studies. The trench walls showed clear evidence of recent seismic activity, fresh rockfalls and shifted formations that confirmed her analysis of why Commander Walsh had sought shelter in this location. At 1,847 feet below surface, Alia's suit lights illuminated the distinctive silhouette of HMS Tireless. The submarine was resting on a relatively stable section of the trench floor, but her hull showed obvious damage from the seismic activity. More critically, the submarine's emergency ballast systems appeared to be malfunctioning, preventing the crew from surfacing even if they'd wanted to abandon their protected position. Alia's communication with the submarine required the specialized underwater acoustic equipment she'd acquired through her network of military surplus contacts. The system was designed for exactly this type of operation, establishing contact with submarines in locations where conventional radio communications were impossible. HMS Tireless, this is Rescue Diver Nelson. Please respond if you can hear this transmission. The response came after nearly 30 seconds, an eternity when operating at extreme depth with limited suit power. Rescue Diver Nelson, this is Commander Walsh. We have 43 souls aboard, life support critical, ballast systems offline. Who the hell are you, and how did you find us? Alia's training in emergency communications protocols guided her response. Sir, I'm Royal Navy personnel conducting deep water rescue operations. What is your current status and most critical needs? We've got maybe 4 hours of breathable air remaining. Hull breach in compartment 3 is sealed but unstable. Main ballast tanks are flooded and pumps are offline. We can't surface and we can't stay down much longer. The technical challenges were exactly what Alia had prepared for during her extensive study of submarine emergency procedures. The ballast system failure was a complex problem requiring external repair work that conventional rescue equipment couldn't perform at this depth. But her atmospheric diving suit and specialized tools were specifically designed for this type of operation. Commander, I can attempt external repairs to your ballast systems. I need you to guide me to the primary pump access panels. Negative, rescue diver. External repairs at this depth are beyond the capabilities of standard diving equipment. You need to return to surface and coordinate with heavy rescue vessels. Alia maneuvered her suit along the submarine's hull, her lights revealing the damaged sections that were preventing Tireless from surfacing. The problems were serious, but not insurmountable for someone with the right equipment and technical knowledge. Sir, I'm equipped for deep water repairs. I can see the ballast pump housing. It appears the intake valves are jammed with debris from the seismic activity. I can clear the obstructions and restart your pumping systems. The work required precise manipulation of her suit's mechanical arms, using cutting tools to remove twisted metal debris while avoiding damage to critical submarine systems. Her months of practice with the equipment, combined with her detailed knowledge of submarine mechanical systems, allowed her to work efficiently even in the challenging underwater environment. Each repair took precious minutes from her suit's power reserves, but Alia's planning had accounted for extended operation time. Her power management protocols, developed through countless practice sessions, allowed her to optimize suit performance for maximum operational duration. Ballast pump number 1 is clear and operational, she reported after 37 minutes of work. Moving to pump number 2. Inside the submarine, she could hear the sound of systems coming back online as compressed air began displacing water from the ballast tanks. Her repairs were working, but the submarine needed both pumps operational to achieve the buoyancy necessary for emergency surfacing. The second pump required more complex repairs, involving replacement of damaged electrical connections that had been severed during the seismic activity. Alia's suit carried exactly the right type of waterproof electrical components for this repair, equipment she'd selected specifically for submarine emergency maintenance. Both ballast pumps are operational, she finally reported. You should be able to achieve emergency surface buoyancy within 10 minutes. Understood, rescue diver. How do we coordinate with surface rescue vessels for crew extraction? Alia smiled inside her helmet, knowing that her most important preparation was about to pay off. Sir, I've already arranged for that.
The moment HMS Tireless breached the surface of the North Atlantic, breaking through the storm-tossed waves in a spectacular fountain of spray and foam, everything changed. Alia's communications equipment immediately activated, broadcasting the submarine's exact coordinates to every rescue vessel and aircraft within range. All stations, this is HMS Tireless. We have surfaced successfully and require immediate crew extraction. Position is 58.7 degrees north, 9.2 degrees west. Repeat, we are surfaced and stable. The response was immediate chaos across every naval frequency. Captain Richardson's voice cut through the radio chatter with barely controlled disbelief. Tireless, confirm your position. You're supposed to be over 40 nautical miles from that location. Confirmed, sir. Position is accurate. We received external assistance from a rescue diver who located us in the Hebrides Trench and repaired our ballast systems. External assistance? What rescue diver? We don't have any dive operations in that area. Commander Walsh's voice carried a mixture of gratitude and confusion as he responded, "Sir, rescue diver identified as Nelson, Royal Navy personnel with specialized deep-water equipment. Without this assistance, we would have lost life support within hours." The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. Then Hayes's voice crackled across the emergency frequency. "Did he say Nelson, as in Specialist Nelson from Communications?" Alia, monitoring the radio traffic from her position alongside the submarine, decided it was time to announce herself officially. "Base Command, this is Specialist Nelson. HMS Tireless is surfaced and stable. All 87 crew members are accounted for and in good condition. Recommend immediate helicopter extraction due to deteriorating weather conditions." The explosion of radio chatter that followed was unlike anything Alia had ever heard on naval frequencies. Multiple voices talking simultaneously, questions being shouted over operational commands, and underlying it all, the unmistakable sound of a military hierarchy trying to process something that didn't fit their understanding of how things were supposed to work. Captain Richardson's voice finally restored order. "All stations, maintain radio discipline. Nelson, report your current status and location." "Sir, I'm in Boat 7 alongside HMS Tireless, conducting surface rescue coordination. The submarine's crew is ready for extraction, but weather conditions are limiting helicopter approach options." "Stand by, Nelson. Repeat, do not conduct any further operations until rescue vessels arrive on scene." But Alia's preparation extended beyond just finding and repairing the submarine. She'd anticipated the extraction challenges posed by the storm conditions and had equipped her patrol boat with specialized helicopter coordination equipment. While the helicopter crews struggled to maintain stable hover in the high winds, she used her boat's advanced positioning systems to create a stable platform for crew transfers. The first helicopter arrived within 40 minutes, its crew visibly amazed to find not only HMS Tireless safely surfaced, but a small patrol boat conducting professional rescue coordination in conditions that had forced much larger vessels to abandon their search efforts. "Rescue 1 to Base Command," the helicopter pilot reported. "We have visual on HMS Tireless and apparently a one-person rescue operation that's already set up landing coordination systems. This is the most organized rescue scene I've ever encountered." As the crew extraction proceeded, Alia maintained constant communication with both the helicopter crews and the submarine, coordinating the complex process of transferring 87 sailors from a damaged submarine to rescue aircraft in severe weather conditions. Her communications training, combined with her understanding of both submarine operations and helicopter limitations, made her uniquely qualified to manage the operation. Commander Walsh was among the last to be extracted from his submarine. Before boarding the rescue helicopter, he made his way to Alia's patrol boat, still wearing his submarine coveralls and looking exhausted from 36 hours of emergency operations. "Specialist Nelson," he said, having to shout over the wind and rotor noise, "I need to know how you found us. Our position was classified, our patrol route was secret, and the trench location was not in any standard rescue protocols." Alia looked up at the submarine commander she'd saved, this man whose voice she'd heard over radio communications for months but had never met in person. "Sir, I study everything. Patrol patterns, submarine capabilities, underwater geography, emergency procedures. I've been preparing for this type of operation for 2 years." 2 years? You've been planning submarine rescue operations for 2 years while working in communications? "Yes, sir. I knew that someday someone would need help in a situation that conventional rescue methods couldn't handle. I wanted to be ready." "Jesus Christ," muttered Walsh, then caught himself. "Sorry, Specialist, but do you realize you just accomplished something that our entire rescue infrastructure said was impossible?" As the final helicopter lifted off with HMS Tireless's crew safely aboard, Alia began the journey back to Portsmouth, knowing that everything about her naval career was about to change.
Her radio crackled constantly with messages from base command, other vessels, and senior officers who were trying to understand what had just happened. But the most important message came from Commander Walsh. "Base Command, this is Walsh. I'm recommending Specialist Nelson for immediate transfer to submarine rescue operations. She's the most qualified underwater rescue specialist I've ever encountered." The conversation about her limitations was finally over.
The Portsmouth Naval Base had never seen anything like the scene that greeted Alia's return. News of the impossible rescue had spread throughout the entire facility, and what seemed like half the base personnel had gathered at the harbor to witness her arrival. The small patrol boat that had departed under cover of routine maintenance had returned as the centerpiece of the most successful submarine rescue operation in Royal Navy history. Captain Richardson stood at the dock with an expression that cycled between relief, amazement, and barely controlled anger. Beside him, Lieutenant Commander Hayes looked like a man whose fundamental understanding of reality had been shaken. The same officers who had dismissed her just hours earlier now watched as she expertly maneuvered Boat 7 into its berth with the confidence of someone who had just saved 87 lives. As Alia stepped onto the dock, still wearing her specialized diving equipment, the crowd's murmur grew louder. Sailors pointed at the atmospheric diving suit, officers examined the sophisticated rescue equipment, and everyone struggled to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the rescue specialist who had just accomplished the impossible. "Specialist Nelson," Captain Richardson began, his voice carrying across the harbor, "you are confined to quarters pending a full investigation of your actions. You have violated numerous regulations, used naval equipment without authorization, and conducted operations far beyond your assigned duties and clearance level." The words should have devastated Alia, but after 38 hours of emergency operations and the successful rescue of an entire submarine crew, they seemed almost anticlimactic. "Yes, sir, I understand. However," Richardson continued, and his tone shifted in a way that made everyone on the dock lean forward to hear better, "your unauthorized actions have also resulted in the successful rescue of HMS Tireless and her entire crew. Without your intervention, we would likely be preparing for the loss of 87 naval personnel." Hayes stepped forward, his face flushed with something between embarrassment and incredulity. "Nelson, how long have you been planning this type of operation?" "Planning, sir? I've been preparing for emergency rescue scenarios since I was assigned to communications. I studied submarine operations, acquired specialized equipment, and developed the skills necessary to conduct deep-water rescues because I believed they might eventually be needed." "And you never thought to inform your superiors of these preparations?" Alia met his gaze steadily. "Sir, with respect, my superiors made it clear that they didn't consider me qualified for submarine-related operations. I didn't think they would be interested in my rescue preparations." The crowd of sailors and officers exchanged glances. Everyone present remembered the countless times Alia's suggestions had been dismissed, her knowledge questioned, her capabilities underestimated. The same expertise that had been seen as inappropriate overreach yesterday was now being recognized as life-saving preparation. Chief Morrison stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. "Nelson, your performance evaluations consistently noted that you were focusing too much on submarine operations instead of your assigned communications duties. We thought you were distracted." "I was preparing, sir, for exactly this type of situation." Commander Walsh's voice crackled through the base's public address system as his helicopter landed nearby. Within minutes, he was striding across the dock, still wearing his emergency evacuation gear and looking like a man who had seen something that changed his understanding of what was possible. "Captain Richardson," Walsh announced as he approached the group, I need to speak with you about Specialist Nelson's performance during our rescue operation." Richardson nodded grimly. "Commander, I'm sure you understand that Nelson's actions, while successful, violated numerous—" "Captain," Walsh interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had just survived an impossible situation. "Specialist Nelson demonstrated knowledge of submarine operations that exceeds most of my own officers. Her technical expertise, equipment capabilities, and operational planning were flawless. She didn't just save my crew, she executed a rescue operation that our entire service said was impossible." The dock fell silent, except for the sound of waves against the harbor walls and the distant noise of helicopter rotors. Walsh's words carried weight that went far beyond a simple commendation. He was essentially stating that a communication specialist possessed submarine expertise superior to trained submarine officers. Hayes found his voice first. "Commander, surely you're not suggesting that Nelson is more qualified for submarine operations than personnel who have completed formal submarine training?" Walsh's response was immediate and definitive. "Lieutenant Commander, I'm not suggesting it, I'm stating it as fact. Nelson's knowledge of my submarine systems, her understanding of our operational procedures, and her ability to execute complex repairs under extreme conditions demonstrate qualifications that go far beyond what I've seen from most formally trained personnel." Richardson held up a hand to prevent further discussion. "This conversation will continue in my office. Nelson, you're still confined to quarters pending investigation, but—" He paused, looking at the woman who had just rewritten the rules of what was considered possible. "I think it's safe to say that that investigation will focus more on how we failed to recognize your capabilities than on whether your actions were justified." As the crowd began to disperse, Alia overheard fragments of conversation that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. "Did you know she had all that equipment? How did she learn submarine repair procedures? I heard she's been studying their operations for 2 years. Maybe we should have listened when she made those suggestions in briefings." The woman they had dismissed as too emotional for submarine duty had just proven herself the most capable submarine rescue specialist in the fleet. The investigation into Alia's unauthorized rescue operation began at 800 hours the following morning in Captain Richardson's office, but it quickly became clear that this wasn't a standard disciplinary hearing. Present were Richardson, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Commander Walsh, and, surprisingly, Rear Admiral Patricia Thornton, who had flown in from Fleet Headquarters specifically to review the incident. Admiral Thornton, a woman in her 50s who had fought her own battles for recognition in the male-dominated naval hierarchy, studied Alia with the calculating gaze of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. The case file spread across Richardson's desk contained not just incident reports, but a comprehensive analysis of Alia's service record, her unauthorized equipment acquisitions, and her extensive self-directed submarine training. "Specialist Nelson," Admiral Thornton began, "your actions present us with an unprecedented situation. On one hand, you violated multiple regulations, ignored direct orders, and conducted operations far beyond your authorized duties. On the other hand, you saved 87 lives and demonstrated capabilities that apparently none of your supervisors recognized." Alia sat at attention, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether she faced court-martial or commendation. "Yes, ma'am. The question we're struggling with," Thornton continued, "is whether your actions represent dangerous insubordination that undermines military discipline or exceptional initiative that our current system failed to recognize and utilize properly." Commander Walsh leaned forward. "Admiral, if I may, there's no question about the value of Nelson's actions. Without her intervention, my entire crew would be dead. The issue isn't whether she should be punished, it's why someone with her qualifications was stuck in a communications role instead of serving where her skills could be properly utilized." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. Commander, with respect, Nelson's qualifications weren't apparent through normal evaluation procedures. Her interest in submarine operations seemed more like inappropriate curiosity than professional competence. Because you never tested her competence, Walsh replied sharply. You assumed she was unqualified based on her background and appearance, not her actual capabilities. Admiral Thornton raised a hand to stop the debate. Specialist Nelson, I want you to explain something to me. How does a communications specialist acquire atmospheric diving equipment worth more than 2 years' salary? How do you develop expertise in submarine repair procedures that exceed most of our trained personnel? And why didn't you pursue official channels for submarine training instead of preparing for unauthorized operations? Alia had prepared for these questions, knowing they would be central to any investigation. Ma'am, I tried official channels. I applied for submarine duty and was rejected. I requested additional training and was denied. I offered suggestions for operational improvements and was told they were outside my area of responsibility. The equipment and training were my way of preparing to contribute when the opportunity arose. But surely you understood that conducting unauthorized rescue operations would result in serious consequences, Richardson asked. Yes, sir, but I also understood that 87 sailors would die if I didn't act. I calculated that the risk to my career was acceptable compared to the cost of doing nothing. Admiral Thornton reviewed the psychological evaluation that had been conducted after Alia's return. Dr. Martinez, the base psychologist, notes that you show no signs of reckless behavior or poor judgment. In fact, your psychological profile suggests exceptional planning abilities and risk assessment skills. How do we reconcile this with the apparent recklessness of your unauthorized mission? Ma'am, the mission wasn't reckless. I had studied the operational area for months, acquired appropriate equipment, developed necessary skills, and calculated the probability of success. I wouldn't have attempted the rescue if I didn't believe it was feasible. Hayes consulted his notes. Nelson, your equipment acquisitions show a level of planning that goes back nearly 2 years. Were you planning to conduct unauthorized operations from the beginning of your service? No, sir. I was planning to be ready if authorized operations became necessary. I hoped to eventually qualify for official submarine rescue duties. When that didn't happen, I continued preparing because I believed the knowledge and skills might still be valuable. Admiral Thornton stood and walked to the window overlooking Portsmouth Harbor, where HMS Tireless was visible at dock, her crew alive and healthy because of the woman sitting in the office behind her. When she turned back, her expression had shifted from interrogation to evaluation. Specialist Nelson, your case forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions about how we identify and develop talent in our service. You possessed qualifications that we failed to recognize, demonstrated capabilities that we dismissed, and showed initiative that we discouraged. She returned to her seat and opened a different file. I've reviewed your communications performance evaluations. They consistently praise your technical competence while noting your excessive interest in submarine operations. What they failed to recognize was that this interest represented exceptional preparation for roles we never considered offering you. Richardson nodded slowly. The question becomes, how do we address this situation moving forward? That, Admiral Thornton replied, depends on whether we want to punish someone for exceeding our expectations or whether we want to learn from our failure to recognize exceptional potential when it was right in front of us. The room fell silent as the implications of her words settled over everyone present. Alia's case wasn't just about one unauthorized rescue. It was about systematic failures in how the Navy identified, developed, and utilized talent.
Admiral Thornton's decision came after 3 days of deliberation that involved consultations with Fleet Command, legal review boards, and submarine warfare specialists. When Alia was called back to Captain Richardson's office, she found not just the original investigation panel, but also Captain James Morrison from the Submarine Warfare Division and Commander Sarah Chen from Personnel Development.
Specialist Nelson, Admiral Thornton began, after extensive review of your case, we've reached several conclusions. First, your unauthorized actions violated multiple regulations and cannot be officially condoned, regardless of their success. Military discipline requires following proper channels and respecting the chain of command. Alia's heart sank, knowing that court-martial proceedings would likely follow such an introduction. However, Thornton continued, we've also concluded that your actions revealed significant failures in our personnel evaluation and development systems. Your capabilities were overlooked, your expertise was dismissed, and your potential was systematically underutilized. These failures contributed directly to the circumstances that led to your unauthorized operation. Captain Morrison leaned forward. Nelson, I've reviewed your technical knowledge through extensive interviews with submarine engineering specialists. Your understanding of submarine systems, rescue procedures, and emergency protocols exceeds that of many officers who have completed formal submarine training. The question we're facing is not whether you're qualified for submarine operations, it's why we failed to recognize those qualifications. Commander Chen opened a file that Alia recognized as containing her complete service record. Your performance evaluations consistently noted excessive interest in areas outside your assigned duties. What they failed to recognize was that this represented self-directed professional development that far exceeded our normal training requirements. Admiral Thornton stood and walked around her desk. Specialist Nelson, effective immediately, you are being transferred to the Submarine Rescue and Deep Salvage Division with the rank of Petty Officer Second Class. This promotion recognizes both your demonstrated capabilities and the specialized skills you've developed. The words hit Alia like a physical shock. Not punishment, but promotion. Not criticism, but recognition. Not the end of her career, but the beginning of the one she'd always wanted. Ma'am, thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet, Thornton replied with a slight smile. Captain Morrison is going to put you through the most intensive submarine training program we've ever developed. You'll complete formal qualifications for every system you've already mastered through self-study, plus advanced training in areas where we think your unique background could be valuable. Morrison nodded. Nelson, you've demonstrated that unconventional preparation can produce exceptional capabilities. We want to understand how that happened and whether we can incorporate your methods into our standard training programs. Hayes, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. Admiral, I have to ask, what about the disciplinary aspects of Nelson's actions? She did violate direct orders. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, Thornton replied, Nelson will receive a formal reprimand for violating orders, which will remain in her service record. However, she'll also receive the Distinguished Service Medal for saving 87 lives under extraordinary circumstances. We believe this appropriately balances the disciplinary and recognition aspects of her actions. Commander Chen consulted her notes. Nelson, your new assignment includes several responsibilities that didn't exist before your rescue operation. Fleet Command has authorized creation of a new position, Deep Water Emergency Response Specialist. You'll be responsible for developing protocols for submarine rescues in extreme conditions, training other personnel in unconventional rescue techniques, and serving as primary rescue coordinator for situations that exceed standard operational parameters. Alia struggled to process the magnitude of what was happening. 2 years of being dismissed and underutilized had suddenly transformed into recognition and opportunities beyond her wildest expectations. There's one more thing, Admiral Thornton added. Commander Walsh has requested that you be assigned as his submarine's emergency response specialist. Apparently, he's convinced that having you available for rescue operations would significantly enhance his crew's safety during extended patrols. Captain Morrison smiled. Nelson, you've essentially created a new career specialty within submarine operations. We're calling it Extreme Environment Rescue Coordination, and you're going to be our first certified specialist in the field. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Thornton handed Alia a set of new orders and insignia reflecting her promotion and specialized assignment. Petty Officer Nelson, Your case has forced us to reconsider how we identify and develop talent. Your experience will be studied by personnel development specialists throughout the fleet." Walking out of Richardson's office, Alia encountered a small crowd of her former communications colleagues who had gathered to hear the results of her investigation. Chief Morrison stepped forward, his expression a mixture of admiration and embarrassment. "Nelson, I owe you an apology. We all do. Your expertise was there all along, and we were too blind to see it." Sarah Chen, her friend from communications, shook her head in amazement. "Alia, do you realize you've just become the Navy's first female deep-water rescue specialist? You didn't just change your own career, you've opened up entirely new possibilities for everyone." As Alia walked across the base toward her new assignment, she reflected on the journey from overlooked communication specialist to recognized submarine expert. Her persistence had paid off, but more importantly, her willingness to prepare for opportunities that didn't yet exist had created possibilities that no one had imagined. The submarine service that had once dismissed her was now rebuilding itself around her capabilities. 18 months later, Alia stood in the same Portsmouth briefing room where she had once been relegated to equipment manifests and ignored suggestions. But everything had changed. The insignia on her shoulder now read Chief Petty Officer Nelson, Deep Water Rescue Specialist. And when she spoke, the entire room listened with the attention reserved for recognized experts. "The emergency beacon activated at 0347 hours, she told the assembled rescue coordination team, pointing to the tactical display showing a submarine in distress. "HMS Astute is reporting catastrophic mechanical failure at a depth of 400 meters, approximately 60 nautical miles northwest of the Shetland Islands." Captain Richardson, now one of her strongest supporters, nodded approvingly. "What's your assessment, Chief Nelson?" "Sir, weather conditions are marginal but manageable. The submarine's position is in a deep-water channel that's accessible to our specialized rescue equipment. I recommend immediate deployment of Rescue Team Alpha with myself as dive coordinator." The response was immediate and professional. No one questioned her qualifications, doubted her expertise, or suggested that the mission might be beyond her capabilities. The same officers who had once dismissed her now competed for assignments to her rescue operations, knowing that her leadership significantly increased their chances of success. Lieutenant Commander Hayes, who had opposed her submarine application years earlier, stepped forward. "Chief Nelson, I'd like to volunteer for this operation. My helicopter crew has worked with your rescue protocols before, and we're familiar with your coordination procedures." "Approved, Hayes. Your crew's experience with deep-water extractions will be valuable for this mission." As the team prepared for deployment, Alia reflected on how dramatically her situation had changed. She now commanded the respect of submarine crews throughout the fleet, had developed rescue protocols that were being adopted by naval forces worldwide, and had trained dozens of specialists in the advanced techniques she'd pioneered. Her success had created ripple effects throughout the service. The Navy had established new career paths for cross-trained specialists, revised personnel evaluation procedures to better identify unconventional talent, and created incentive programs for self-directed professional development. Alia's case had become a textbook example of how institutional barriers could prevent organizations from recognizing and utilizing exceptional capabilities. The rescue operation proceeded with the efficiency that had become characteristic of Alia's missions. Her team reached HMS Astute within 90 minutes, established communication with the submarine crew, and began the complex process of emergency repairs and crew extraction. The operation that would have been considered impossible 3 years earlier was now routine for Alia's specialized rescue division. "Base Command, this is Chief Nelson," she reported from her position alongside the surfaced submarine. "HMS Astute is stable, with all crew members safe and accounted for. We're beginning helicopter extraction procedures." "Outstanding work, Chief," came Richardson's response. Your rescue time of 4 hours and 37 minutes sets a new fleet record. As the final crew members were lifted to safety, Commander Walsh, now a close colleague and frequent collaborator, approached Alia's rescue vessel. His submarine had been conducting training exercises in the area and had responded to provide support for the rescue operation. "Another textbook rescue, Chief," Walsh said as he climbed aboard. "Do you ever get tired of making the impossible look routine?" Alia smiled, watching the last rescue helicopter disappear toward Portsmouth with its load of grateful submarine crew members. The journey back to Portsmouth gave Alia time to reflect on her transformation from overlooked communications specialist to the Navy's premier submarine rescue expert. She thought about the young woman who had sat in the recruitment office, desperately hoping for a chance to prove herself worthy of submarine duty. That woman could never have imagined that her rejection would lead to something far more significant than traditional submarine service. Her personal quarters now contained commendations from international naval forces, technical papers she'd authored on deep-water rescue procedures, and correspondence from military academies requesting her expertise for their training programs. But the most meaningful item was a simple photograph. The crew of HMS Tireless, all 87 sailors she'd saved during that first unauthorized rescue operation, standing together on Portsmouth dock with their families. As her rescue vessel entered Portsmouth Harbor, Alia could see another young woman in the recruitment office, probably sitting in the same uncomfortable chair where she'd once waited nervously for an interview. The sight reminded her that her story wasn't just about personal vindication. It was about changing the conversation for everyone who would come after her. The Navy that had once dismissed her for being too emotional now recognized emotion as a valuable quality that enhanced rather than hindered professional performance. The service that questioned her dedication to submarine operations now held her up as the standard for what dedication could accomplish. Alia had spent 2 years underwater, not just physically, but professionally, submerged beneath assumptions and limitations that others had placed on her. When she finally surfaced, she brought with her capabilities that no one had imagined possible. The woman they had laughed at for applying to submarine duty had become the person who redefined what submarine service could be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.